So in this session, it's kind of like what Amanda did is I will try to model like what I do in the classroom or what is helpful techniques in the classroom. And I will have you do activities. I will be talking so this session is about, pedagogy and classroom management for special populations, and I have a little list of what those special populations are. But I have activities for you. I'm hoping to have strategies, because a lot of times classroom management is about how to interact with your class. And I also teach at CSUMB. I teach a classroom management class at CSUMB in their teacher credential program. And I tell the students, and we'll talk a little bit more about this, I tell the candidates, your classroom management starts prior to school starting, right? Like setting up your class prior to school starting. Because if you're starting those management strategies and you have things in place before the first day of school, then it'll be clear in your head what you want to see happen. A lot of candidates, a lot of teachers, a lot of people who want to be teachers think of classroom management as that moment in time, like kind of Amanda showed on that one picture where a student is throwing a paper wad across the room. And then classroom management is that moment. But actually classroom management starts way before then. Like so right now you could start thinking about what you plan to do, say, in summer school or fall. But anyway, I've gotten ahead of myself, which is not completely unusual. So let's talk a little bit about the special populations we'll be looking at for today. So there's three. The homeschooled students, we'll kind of blend them in with the other two groups. And the activities and everything you'll be doing in relation to the upper two groups will like kind of include the homeschool. So students with special needs, this includes students with physical disabilities, mental health or behavioral issues, chronic illnesses, and or invisible disabilities. Now typically, it's on an average of about 10% of a school. That's an average. Here at Cabrillo, it's 13.5%. This is an average. The average percentage of folks in the general population is 10%. So you will find generally that students or people with special needs in a school reflect the larger population. Let's walk through this just a little bit. So now, just a little kind of interesting story. Probably approximately 30 years ago, 40 years ago, a person with a disability in a school was somebody with a physical disability. Somebody in a wheelchair, or somebody who maybe was blind, with Canadian crutches, the ones with the wraps around their arms. Now, over the years, in the last 30 or 40 years, the federal government has started to enlarge, or not enlarge, but look at what the different disabilities could be. And the reason why it's important that the federal government recognizes it is that's how schools are funded and how they serve their students. So if the federal government does not recognize a disability, then a school can serve a student, but they won't be paid for that. And I know that's not what this session is about. So you will get, like I said, students with physical disabilities. The largest number within the 10% of disabilities is mental health or behavioral. Those are the largest numbers here at Cabrillo. So of the 13% at Cabrillo, and I'm sorry to just speak about Cabrillo, but I did a little research. Of the 13% here at Cabrillo, about 30% of the students are students with learning disabilities, about 13%. And then about 25% of the students with disabilities have psychological or psychiatric disabilities. So the reason why I bring up that breakdown for you is many times when a student walks through the door of your classroom, there's not going to be some indicator that that student has a special need. And that's going to be really important for our discussion today and our activities. Because as I was saying previously, 40 years ago, students with disabilities, usually you could see that physical disability and then accommodate accordingly. So I bring that up because sometimes instructors may not be prepared. Because a student doesn't quote look like they have a disability. The other thing, chronic illnesses, asthma is considered a disability. So if a student has asthma, epilepsy, so there's disabilities that we might not typically put in that category, but they are considered, invisible disabilities, anxiety disorders. That's a disability, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. So our second special population is English language learners. And just a couple of things here. What makes somebody an English language learner, and I would really prefer to call them a language learner, because many language learners in school, this isn't their second language, it's sometimes their third or fourth language. In the olden days, we used to call it ESL, English as a second language. And then we started to realize, well, wait a minute, for many of these students, this isn't their second language, this is their third language, their fourth language, their fifth language. So we started calling it English language learners. I go by the thought that everybody is learning language, even their home language, they're still learning it. You go into biology classroom, my PhD is in linguistics. If I walked into a biology classroom, I would not have a clue of any of the language in that classroom. Osmosis, kind of vaguely remember that from when I was in 10th grade. That's a new language for me. So I see not just English language learners, but language learners, and we're all language learners, especially if you teach a very content-driven class. Home language is different from the target language. And then these students are learning English simultaneously with other content. So you have an English language learner who's learning English in addition to the home language that they know, or the other languages, and they're learning biology, or they're learning chemistry, or they're learning calculus, or they're taking English literature. So they're learning language simultaneously to learning the content that you're teaching in the classroom. So keep that in mind. That's a lot of learning. They're in the classroom. They're learning this content, they're embracing it, but they're also having to learn kind of regular language, and we'll call it, social language and academic language simultaneously. And then they're having to function in these languages. So if you think about how language is learned, the first thing a person learns when they're born is to listen. Right? So you're listening. Babies are listening. They're taking language. Then the next thing they learn, unfortunately, is to speak. Right? Now, oh, shucks, that baby was so cute, and now he's learning to talk. All right? Then they learn to read and write together. So now imagine you have a language learner who's in school, a high school student, and they're listening, and they're producing language, and they're learning content, and they're going to high school, and they're taking a college class. Think of all the layers that are going on for that student. And that's not just the high school students, but that's a lot. And then depending on the college, and I really want to point that out, depending on the college, up to 60% of the population can be English language learners, depending on the college, okay? So not at our college, it may not be at your college. I'm saying expansively. And then once again, we're going to, because of time probably, fold in homeschooled students. But typically, homeschooled students are younger. They're usually under 18 years of age. Many of them are very articulate. So you sometimes hear, oh, homeschooled students, they're not very social. They're isolated from their peers. That's sometimes the urban legends about homeschooled students. But typically, they are actually fairly well socialized, especially here in Santa Cruz, where we have a really strong homeschool district infrastructure. These students, even though they're homeschooled, they interact a lot with each other and other families, and they come to Cabrillo, they come and take different classes. So they are actually extremely articulate, really well socialized, and a lot of times, depending on the family and depending on the interactions with other families, they are extremely well educated in a specific content area. So I want to kind of take away from some of the myths that we have about homeschooled students. So you're going to do a little activity. So we're going to start with special needs students, because I want your brain to start to feel what your students feel. Okay. So take a little sticky. You're going to get an opportunity to write. And I want you while you're writing to think about some things. So I want you to describe in writing, you have a little sticky in front of you, the home where you grew up or spent the majority of your childhood. So some people have moved around a bit. So just think of where you've spent the majority of your childhood. But I want some rules. There's some rules, some directions. So first, you must write in complete sentences. What does that mean? I try to tell my students, email me in complete sentences. Not even. I need the, I'm like, what do you need? The assignment, the handout? Okay, you need. And I emailed them back, hello. Start each sentence with a noun or a pronoun. A noun or a pronoun. But each word in the sentence cannot have more than one syllable. Each word. Okay, I've seen some stunned looks on your faces. Good. That's the whole purpose of this activity. I have a purpose. Like Amanda, we have a purpose. So take a minute and give this a try. I mean, you might say, there is no way, but give it a try. And so if you're saying there's no way, think about how your students would feel. Think about a student with special needs that looks a set of directions. And the first direction says, oh, I can do that. And then the second direction, oh, I can do that. And then the third direction, oh, wait. So just give it a try, and then we'll talk about it. So after you've tried or have written a sentence or two, I want you to share with the neighbor. So we're going to share out. I think it's always important that people have opportunities. Think of your students with special needs and students learning language, having opportunities to constantly share how they feel. Even mainstream students, even just general students. How did this activity make you feel? So Amanda talked about how high school students are still having brain development and based on feelings. So it's important for us to keep remembering how things feel. We're educated, we're adults, we are, as teachers, we feel like we have a good handle on what we do, but our students may not feel that way. So share with a neighbor, take about 30 seconds, 40 seconds. You can read for them what you wrote, you don't need to, but tell them how you felt. How did this make you feel? Take a couple minutes, or not minutes, 30 seconds. Okay, so let's come back together just because I don't want to run out of time. So call out, how did it, don't tell me about your house, it's all right, but I mean, I'm fine to hear, yay! But how did it make you feel? Give me one word. Denise, do you mind saying how it made you feel? Because panic. So panic. So think about a student looking at those directions, and these directions are pretty straightforward, right? I as a teacher think, wow, I've written some great rules. You must write in complete sentences. I think we all understand, for the most part, what a complete sentence is, for the most part. Then the second, start each sentence with a noun or a pronoun. Now, I did that intentionally because a noun, oh, person, place, or thing, yay! Schoolhouse rocks, yay! I recognize that cartoon from when I was in 4th grade. But a pronoun, oh no, what's a pronoun, what's a pronoun? Did we learn about this in this class? Students will always think that because they expect that what you're doing with them is related to the class that you're teaching them. And we as teachers have a tendency, because we have such a broad range of knowledge, to pull pieces of knowledge from other areas of information, which is all right, but the student may not realize that. And think of a student with special needs, so a pronoun, but wait, this is a chemistry class, or this is, like I have 2 bachelor's degrees. I have one in math and one in English. And so when I teach math, I have my students do a lot of writing. And the first thing they say to me, this isn't a writing class. I'm like, well, what's the word problem, sweetie? Okay? But then this is the one that catches most people up. I, pronoun, lived, 2 syllables. And already it's really hard to complete that sentence. Okay? So let's go back to anxiety. The activity had made you feel, and the key here that I want you to take from this is the way we feel about tasks, all of us. will really affect how we do on that task. That is essential. So think of your students with special needs. Think of all your students. If a student feels like they do well in school, then will they embrace school and be motivated? Most likely. We're usually more motivated to do things we feel good about, and less motivated to do things we don't feel quite so good about. So let's look at the types of anxiety. And now let me say this. I try to put this into kind of layperson's language. There's I teach like whole classes for my credential students on this, but I wanted to make it more accessible. So you may have felt debilitative anxiety. Debilitative anxiety, the anxiety is so intense, sorry Denise, not to call you out, but that it just shuts the person down. And then like Amanda was saying, then you have a student just sitting there, just glazed over. And we may be thinking, oh, they don't feel like doing our assignment. And I spent all last week really putting this together. I think this is a brilliant assignment. What's wrong with that student? That may not be it at all. They may just be so anxious about how to tackle that they just can't move forward on it. All right? So it's so intense that an individual is not able to move forward and they shut down. They literally just shut down. And I've watched students walk into class all excited. Okay, I'm here. I finally got here on time. Dr. Soltis won't get on me about being late, blah, blah, blah. My cell phone's in my backpack because I don't allow cell phones. Yay, this is going to be a great day. And they look up and they're like, oh, maybe this isn't going to be such a great day. All right? But there are ways to construct things for our students that we create facilitative anxiety. Anxiety can be good. Anxiety can be good. It can move you to that next level because you're just like, I'm running this race. Oh, they're just ahead of me. They're only that far ahead of me. If I take 2 giant steps, I'm going to be in first place. I'm not the last one. That's debilitative. Oh, look at all those people ahead of me. I'm never going to make it. I'll just walk the rest of the race. But facilitative anxiety is anxiety that helps get a person working on a task. Students can feel a little nervous, like, oh, I'm not sure I can do this, but they can use it to move forward and complete the task. So there are ways to create assignments, there are ways to create your classroom environment that helps to, as much as possible, to keep this facilitative, to keep, if there's anxiety, to keep anxiety facilitative or no anxiety at all. So one of the things that I do, I teach reading over at West Valley College. I love teaching reading. I love teaching reading. I love it. I love it. And you know why I love teaching reading? You're like, no, tell us. Because I love to read. I love to read. I love to read. I used to get detention in school for reading. I'm like, okay, something's wrong with this picture, Mrs. Smith. But I love reading. So I want people to have that same passion for reading. So right there, when I walk in the first day and I just tell them, you are going to love reading as much as I love reading, they're just like, sure we will. By the end of the semester, they love reading. Because there's a lot of anxiety around reading. One of it, do you remember from 2nd grade when the teacher would suddenly out of the blue call on you and then say, read aloud? And you're like, I don't know where we are. Somebody, where are we? Are we on the page 2? Are we on page 3? And really you feel that. I never call anybody to read aloud. Because I know that when students are taking beginning reading classes in college, it has nothing to do with their academic ability. It has to do with the feelings they've had about school for all those years. All right, so keep that in mind. I'm just kind of getting you going here. So some things to know about students with special needs. It is not uncommon for students with special needs to experience anxiety around school and school tasks. Now, there are many students who have anxiety disorders. So that's a whole other kind of category of anxiety. But even if they don't have, say, an anxiety disorder, they in their experience of the school, in their frame of reference with school, because of their special needs, they've always been designated as, oh, you have a special need. And your need doesn't match the mainstream classroom. Now, these aren't words that people say explicitly, but this is what is communicated to these students. It maybe not unintentionally, but it's still communicated. So imagine you're the one person in a room who does not understand what's going on, or you think you're the one person in the room. And probably the other 29 people don't really understand either. But everybody, like Amanda and I were talking about, somebody tells a joke, people just laugh whether they get it or not, because you don't want to look like the person who isn't getting the joke, right? So, but think of now the student knows they have a disability. No one else in the classroom seems to have a disability that they're aware of. And so they're feeling like, and they're the high school student in the classroom, in a college classroom. So now you're just layering on all that anxiety, and they have yet to come through the door, right? So that's when you start setting up your room prior to, coming in. Students with special needs may or may not want others to know. So keep that in mind. So especially high school students, they may come in and they may not want to tell you. And that, because I teach reading, I do probably, in some of my classes, I have 70 to 80% of the students who have some sort of special need or disability. And they may or may not want to tell you. So keep that in mind. Because they may not want others to know, they may not go to disabled student services. I'm loosely calling it that. It has a different name at different schools. But so keep that in mind. So you may have a high school student come into your classroom or a college student. And they may not want to tell anybody, so they have not gotten the appropriate resources that they need to make them not do better, but to help that anxiety come down. So keep that in mind. It's like knowing all these layers and being cognizant of where somebody is starting. I tell people I never assume anything. I never assume anything about people because you just don't know. Like Amanda mentioned, they may have just worked a 24-hour shift, a 30-hour shift, and the fact that they're sitting in your class, after that, I teach research at UC Merced, and I have a student who's an ambulance driver, and sometimes he'll come into class, and the poor person, he just looks exhausted. And one day I say, "Are you all right? Can I help you out in some way?" And he said, "Oh, I drive an ambulance." I'm like, "Whoa, that's impressive. So you see blood on the job?" And he's like, "Yeah." I'm like, "Whoa, that's even more impressive. I don't do blood." I'm like, somebody put a Band-Aid on it and don't make me look. Okay, so keep all those things in mind. Now here's kind of what I'll say is the kicker though. For a student to get any sort of assistance at a school, at a college, for a student to get any sort of assistance, they need to go to disabled student resources, or here we call it, something else. They need to go to that resource, and they need to route through that office to be able to get the accommodations that they need for your classroom. Technically, and I underline this intentionally, technically, you as an instructor of a class at a college can't give them any accommodations without that accommodation sheet. Now, you can. You as an instructor, it's your classroom. You can do what you want. So I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying, though, that technically, to best serve those students, to know exactly what they need, this accommodation sheet can make a world of difference. Now, I will say this. I accommodate my students always, regardless of what paperwork they hand me, because I see it as my number one job as a teacher is to make sure my students are successful. And I have to come up to the plate as they're coming up to the plate and match them. But technically, legally, the technical part of it, what helps you as an instructor is to know what needs that they have, because a student might say, "I need some extra time on this test." Well, they may, but maybe the other 29 students would like also some extra time on the test. So what I do is I just give them all extra time on the test. Okay, here are your accommodations. Extra time on tests, seating change, like if they need to sit closer to see something or hear something. Note takers, alternate forms such as digital text, like if they need Kurzweil to have a book read, aloud for them while they're reading it, and audio or braille. These are technically by law the accommodations. But you're right, on an accommodation form, you'll see that the disabled student counselor might have written extra time on tests or like a recording of the class. But technically, this is it. This is it. Yeah, no, you'll see that other things are written in. And no, the student hasn't written, well, for the most part, it is the disabled student counselor who has assessed the student and then determined, oh, you need this or you need that. And I've gotten those accommodation sheets where it says extra time on assignments. So that's not an unusual, it's not atypical that you'll get that. So how to help? Let all students know, high school students, because now this is where it's going to be really important with the high school component, that if they require support, they need to contact a disabilities office to receive the support. Because once again, sometimes students don't know, especially high school students, because the way it works in a high school is very different than the way it works in college. In a high school, if a student has been tested or identified in elementary, middle, or high school, that paperwork follows them. They never have to say another word again. I mean, they can talk, but they don't have to go and identify themselves. So that paperwork is in their file, and the school knows that. So when they walk in a classroom, teachers and everybody, K-12, know what that student needs and knows that there's accommodations without any conversation going on between the student and the K-12 instructor. College is completely different. Regardless of if a student has had any sort of accommodations in kindergarten through 12th grade, the student needs, the student, not the instructor, the student needs to go to Disabled Student Services and identify themselves. Now, if they have an IEP or a 504 plan, and they have that like in their hands, and they walk it over to Disabled Student Services, that will work. They don't have to be reassessed. Then Disabled Student Services just writes up the accommodations based on that report. So they don't have to be reassessed. But their paperwork isn't automatically going to be walked over to the Disabled Student Services office by somebody. They themselves have to do it. Does that make sense? So that's, but what let all students know, I put it in my syllabus for all students, that if they think they need services, I even go through this, discussion of, oh, have you ever had troubles in 5th grade? Did you have troubles in 8th grade? Was reading really, really hard? Because sometimes they don't realize, some of it might just be they hate reading, but some of it might be it wasn't just some sort of learning disability and they're just not aware of it. So I had this conversation through the whole class, but the high school students, I let them know that even if you've had any sort of services K-12, that's not automatically going to follow you to Cabrillo or follow you to West Valley. So keep that in mind, that if you have high school students in your class, when you make these kind of more general announcements, it's good to also say if anybody's from high school, not pointing anybody out, but if anybody's from high school and you might have something, you need to either come and talk to me and I'll direct you in the right way. Not just say, good luck with that, bye-bye. But I'll kind of get you over there, but it's not going to automatically follow. And I think that's the key for the high school students. That's the key, is letting them know that they still need to go to Disabled Student Services at the college where they're taking their class. All right? Now here's some language that I put in my syllabus. So here's an example. I put this in my syllabus, and I will say that within the first 2 weeks of the term, I'm very clear about that. And there's a reason. Because as Geneva has kind of started to point out, what can happen? They're starting the semester, things are going fine. They're like, oh, it's all right, I might not need help. And then midterms hit, and you're in week 7. And then finals start, and you're in week 12. And now suddenly they want accommodations. And you're like, well, wait a minute here. We're going to rearrange a whole semester, or the semester's ending in 2 weeks, and now you want an extension past, and you have to get grades in. It gets pretty unwieldy. It really can get pretty unwieldy. So what I really emphasize to them, that they need to get me their paperwork within the first 2 weeks. Then I tell them when they bring it to me, you may never use this. That is perfectly all right. Just because I have the paperwork, it's like an insurance policy. You have car insurance. Hopefully you'll never be in an accident, but at least you have the car insurance. So if you have your paperwork to me within the first 2 weeks, then when things happen, I can then accommodate you. But if you don't get me anything, it more ties my hands, especially this whole extension on assignments thing. That, I will say, that has been, in my experience, and I've been teaching for over 30 years, that has become very predominant, this extension on assignments. I didn't have that 25 years ago. It was more extension time on tests. They needed Kurzweil. They needed a note taker. I used to work in disabled student services at UC Berkeley. Note taking was the big thing, you know, back in the olden days. They'd get out the stone and get out the chisel and carve the little notes, you know. But thank you for laughing. My college students don't get that. They're like, you used a stone to take notes? I'm like, thank you for laughing. You've made my day. So this is actual language that is in my syllabus. And then I know it seems really kind of thing, but I also want them to know that there are rules and policies that they need to abide by. That's not just, you know, kind of a freewheeling, you know, I know you really care about me, Dr. Mary, and I know you understand my anxieties, so anything goes. That there's certain kind of rules around how everybody is going to behave in this context. The other thing I do in my syllabi is I'm very clear about due dates. I have a whole calendar of events for the whole semester. So they know that the research paper is due in May. They can get started in January. I mean, I am very clear, and I don't change things. I say surprises are for birthdays and Christmas or whatever holiday you celebrate. Surprises are not for a classroom. I don't do pop quizzes. There should be no surprises in the classroom unless you want to bring cupcakes for your birthday. Then we'll all celebrate, all right? So, and I'm sorry to kind of race us through this because this is an issue that I see increasing, that people want more time on assignments. Okay, Denise's eyes are getting big again. No. So with the person next to you, and you can write, you don't have to, take 2 minutes to generate ideas of how to support students before the semester starts. So one way I've shown you is language in your syllabus. That's in your syllabus before the semester starts. Right? You have your, hopefully, right? Yes, just shake your head yes, even if you don't. You have your syllabus done before the semester starts. What are some other ways? What are some other ways that you can create support for your student before the first day of school? Just talk to each other. Just talk to each other. Some of the ways to create resources before the semester starts cost nothing. You know, it's not like you have to go and buy things, or they can be, you know, fairly simple. So what did you come up with? What are some things? So we have syllabus language. Geneva.
So I send a welcome letter on Canvas.
So Geneva, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, just for the taping. Geneva sends a welcome letter on Canvas.
But I'm thinking, what if I were to post the syllabus early on? Like, you know,
I do.
publish my Canvas course with the syllabus before they even meet with me, so they know what they're getting into.
So going to that, so a welcome letter on Canvas, and I don't want to assume that we're all familiar with Canvas. Canvas is the community college kind of online system for, you know, putting resources, and it's kind of like, do you know what Blackboard is, and Moodle? It's like the community college. What I do, going to what Geneva's saying, a welcome letter, I do that. I do a syllabus, and then the first day of class, when I hand out the syllabus, I have students annotate the syllabus. And they have to annotate it for 3 things. The main idea. So that means like, oh, what's the main idea of this class? What's the purpose of this class? I want them to start to read through the syllabus, because when they have to annotate a syllabus, they're going to pay much more attention to the syllabus because they're taught to annotate. The second thing I have, since I'm a kind of a reading person, main idea, details, and vocabulary. So the main idea, what's the purpose of the class? The details are, what are 3 things, 3 details of the class that will make you successful in the class? Because not everybody needs to know a piece of information to make them successful. So as an example to that, I don't accept any late work at all. I just don't. Now, I build in like extra credit. I build in other assignments to make up for points if a student misses an assignment, but I don't accept late work. And there's a whole kind of reason for that. I mean, multiple reasons. So the example I use with my students is for some students who maybe are chronically late on things, that's a detail they will need to know to be successful in the class. For me, as a person, I am not. I'm early for everything. So that's not a detail that I would make note of, because that's not, I mean, I will read that and think, oh, I shouldn't be late, turning late work, but that's something I wouldn't do anyway, so I wouldn't put that down as a detail for myself. But there might be another detail in there, like quizzes are worth, or whatever. So one, again, the main idea, I have them, the purpose of the class. The second thing, 3 details that make them successful, that will make them personally successful in the class. And then the third thing is any vocabulary that they don't recognize or understand, and you will be surprised. The word syllabus is a surprise for a lot of high school students. Nowadays, more high schools are starting to give out syllabi, but a lot aren't. And so that first thing. If there's any unique vocabulary in your content area, you may use some of that unique vocabulary in the syllabus. There's a good moment in time to start to see what your students are seeing. And then I just say, they say, well, what if I don't know a word? Circle it. What if I kind of know the word? Circle it. The only way you're not circling a word on that syllabus is if you know it so well, you know it like you know the word class, you know what that means. So syllabus, I put syllabus on Canvas. I have them annotated the very first day of class, and I put in my little announcement welcoming them saying, here's the syllabus, and by the way, the first day of class, this is what you will be doing. So that at least, not that they'll annotate it right then and there when they read it, but when they come to class, hopefully they've just at least looked through it, and then they'll read through it again. What are some other resources you came up with for before the first day of class?
So we have this dashboard where you can learn about your students before you ever meet them. And you can get some really basic demographics, but that can sometimes give you a sense of trends in your classroom. And
Yes.
who your students are going to be before you meet them.
So Geneva is saying, like, most colleges have a dashboard. They have something where you can look at kind of the demographic makeup trends. So kind of learning about your students before they even show up. If you use Canvas, what I also do is I look at the list of students who are in my Canvas class, and then I look to see how many of them have actually got into Canvas and looked at it. I'm just kind of curious. I mean, and it's not the way I'm going to grade them. It's not. It just gives me a sense of who understands Canvas, maybe that they were able to log in and use it, and at least figure out kind of, and I can see what they looked at. And then if there's students who didn't log into Canvas yet, which is fine because it's not a requirement before the class starts, then I can ask them, okay, let's do a walkthrough of Canvas the very first day. Let me teach you how to do it. Let me show you. Let me show you all the little fun things.
I actually put that in my welcome letter because some people do not know how to. So
Awesome. So she was saying, so she puts a tutorial for Canvas in the welcome letter. Beautiful. Now here's the other beauty of all of these things, is this is going to support all students. That is the beauty of thinking about students with special needs and what they need, because there really is going to be almost everything you do for those students will help everybody, right? And that's really what this is about, is to support all students. So this, if you look at these, none of this is something so unique that you're going to have to really do a ton of extra work for the 5 students in your class who have special needs. All of these things are strategies that will help everybody in your class. And that's I think really is very essential, is to be helping all of our students, but being very aware of the students with special needs, particularly the high school students with special needs.
May I add one more thing?
Oh, definitely.
So another thing that I do in my welcome letter is I will tell them where the class is located in this building. Beautiful. And also thinking about the parking, because the parking tends to be crazy.
Brilliant. So what she's saying is in the welcome letter that she writes, she tells them where the class is Yikes. Where the classes, I just got a time. Where the class is located, parking, which can be a bear. Brilliant, brilliant. Okay, so I am so sorry. We're going to have to vamonos here and move a little more quickly. Okay, so I'm going to just run you through these, and they're really fun facts. So it takes 7 years to learn a language, any language, not just English, any language. So just take a moment. Not 7 years, just take a moment to think about that. 7 years to learn a language. Imagine. So when a child is born up to 7 years old, they are acquiring enough words by year 7 to have language in their head to be able to communicate for the rest of their life. But that's not, and that's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So that's the other thing, is contact with the language. Children who are read to before entering school will be exposed to approximately 1 million more words than those who aren't. So now you're thinking, why not working with children? But you're working with adults who were children. And some of them will still act like children in your classroom. But no, think about that. So one of the things I do with all my students, whether I'm teaching math, whether I'm teaching credential students, whether I'm teaching research, I have them write for me the first day a little autobiography, and my question to them is always, what were your literacy experiences in your life? Not what was your reading and writing. I want to know how they conceptualize literacy. And then that gives me a really good sense of the language that, what their language experiences are. And then Cummins, here I have a little on the side, developed this theory that there are kind of these broad categories of language acquisition. One of them is cognitive academic language, and the other is basic interpersonal communication. The academic language, for the most part, is more difficult to learn because there's not a context that supports it. So you say the word osmosis, there's no, you don't have context. Where if you say the word house, there's context. So social language is easier to learn because typically it's contextual. It has tone, it has physical interaction. Academic language can be more difficult. So once again, imagine your students, your language learners, they're in your classroom learning not only kind of learning language, but they're also learning the content of your classroom. So they're learning the academic, but then they're also learning getting some of the social. And I'm sorry, now I'm going to be kind of racing here. These are the keys to success in learning language. There are more than this. I chose out the ones that would apply to instructors for a class. So there are others that make people successful at learning language, but I pulled these out. Access to the target language. So keep that in mind, that if students are getting language input from you, that's awesome, but you're only one person. If you have students working in groups, now they're getting access to the target language from multiple people in the classroom and multiple levels. You want people learning language to be with people who are better at the language than they are, but also not as good, right? Because then they would help the person not as good, and teaching helps you to learn. So don't be the only access to the target language in your classroom. Motivation to learn, there are ways to motivate students. That's the whole semester. But one of the things that my UC said, one of my research students told me the other day, she said, I love coming to your class. I'm like, oh, doing statistical analysis? And she said, you make it like funny. I said, oh, it's the way I dress. And she laughed. She goes, see, there it is. You just have those jokes. So she feels motivated just because I have a really bad sense of humor. But hey, it works. Opportunity to access resources of learning. So creating multiple resources. I always choose readings for my classes that have movies. Always. And I will tell you, one of their assignments, because you know what they're going to go running to do. I'm going to go watch the movie. I'm like, good luck with that. Because when I give a quiz, I'm not going to ask you why, Antonio Banderas did this. And if you don't know the name of the character, that quiz is going to be extra difficult. So, but if you give them not just reading and not just listening, but if you give them other pieces, like the movie, they watch the movie, they read the book, they start to put all those pieces together, the different resources of learning. Access to speakers of the target language, like I said, getting into groups, working with each other. And I'm so sorry to like race you through this because this is so essential. And I was going to talk a little bit more about this, but multimodal teaching, what I am not doing right now is I'm just kind of talking at you, so to speak. Whenever I do handouts, I make them different colors. So the assignment sheets are always yellow. The syllabus is green. The information sheets are like, say, lavender. So students key into that. So when they get a yellow sheet, when I'm handing this out, they're like, oh, this is going to be an assignment sheet. So even if their language skills aren't super honed, they know that that yellow sheet's important to them, right? So they're going to maybe pay a little bit more attention. I read things aloud to them so they can auditorily hear what a word sounds like. And let me quickly give you a perfect example of this. When I was growing up, and I grew up in the United States, my family talked about Yosemite all the time when I was a child. Then one day we drove to Yosemite, and I saw this on a sign. I go, where's Yosemite? My dad's like, Yosemite? I've never heard of Yosemite. I'm like, huh. Well, if you say the word and you look at the word, it doesn't necessarily sound like it looks. So reading things out loud to your students, assignment sheets especially, so they're very clear. They can hear the language they're reading. It's really important to make these connections for language learners. Group work, wait time, which I'm not doing right now. Amanda did an amazing job on wait time, giving people time to think, to process, to look. When you're thinking in one language, you still need processing time. If you have a special need, you need processing time. What we don't realize nowadays, because we have so much sensory input in the world, we don't have a lot of quiet time in our lives. The radio's on, cell phones are, everything's going on. So I will wait for my students, and then I will whisper, like they were talking about. I whisper, because I'm not a quiet person, as you probably have figured that one out. I don't need this microphone. But if I'm suddenly whispering, they're all stopping. She's saying something important. And quiet is good. Quiet is good. Wait time. And then vocabulary word banks, regardless of what I'm teaching, each of my students, if it's research, if it's my graduate students, they all get a package of index cards from me the very first day of class. And any word they hear that they don't know, they write it down. I never make my students look anything up in a dictionary, because dictionary definitions are awful. Running, to run. Well, if you don't know what run means, then the definition is not helping you, right? So then I collect the index cards at the end of a week, maybe 2 weeks, and I go through and I define everything for them, because I want to put it in speakable terms. I don't want my students walking around speaking like they're a textbook. And a lot of words, the way it's defined, the students will know the definition, but they won't know the part of speech. So then they'll put the word in the wrong place in the sentence, and then they sound kind of not like they're understanding. So here's a little bit more about that, but I definitely define every single word for my students. And when I collect those index cards, a lot of times I will see that multiple students will have the same word, so I only need to define it once. I really think it's important that somebody who is fluent in a language do the explaining on what language means. The dictionary is not meant for that. It really isn't. Have you ever been to another country and had a dictionary and tried to find the bathroom? It can get really ugly really fast. So I'm very dedicated to that part of my classes, regardless of what I teach, that I have a list of words. I usually put a list of words on the board before class starts that may be new vocabulary for them, especially in research. And then I go over all of those words when class starts. I give them their index cards at the beginning of the semester so they carry them with them. And then I define those words, but they're also writing down other words I might say and not have assumed that they wouldn't know. That, to me, it's essential. Language is essential. Language is essential to life. And if people don't feel like they have a grasp of language, either spoken or written or both, they're not going to feel like they can fully participate in life. And you want them to feel that way in your classrooms. You want them to be able to like just, but here we have it, a resource. So everything I've said, you thought, you could have just given us the handout. And here it is, very pretty. Thank you, Career Ladders. They made them so beautiful. So I'll hand this out in just a moment. But the other thing that we're going to do, and we're out of time, but what I would like for you to take away from this, and you have some stickies, but we're out of time, is I wanted you to write down either one fact or one strategy that caught your attention. Not define it, just, like word banks. And then what I was going to have you do, so think about this, have your students do this. Then I was going to put the facts on one side and the strategies on another, and then look at really what's essential to this group. So if we had a bunch of facts, that means this group is really interested in the facts. If we had a bunch of strategies, then that's what we would have continued the next time we met. That's what I do with my classes. When there's new information, I break it up into kind of categories for them. And at the end of class, I say, okay, so put on a sticky, whatever those strategies are. For us, it was, strategies and facts. And then I look, kind of like what Amanda did, I put it, and then I say, okay, next class we have, this is what really caught your attention this time. We'll start the next time with that. All right? Let me give you this. Did I do it? Yes! Woohoo! And Amanda set it all up. I have to say, her presentation definitely got us going. So here's, and this has like more details about strategies for language learners.